Lovely to see such a great crowd here on a Thursday night. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Cornell ILR's lovely New York City office space. I have the honor of getting us started tonight, where we will share and discuss findings from our Climate Jobs Institute team's latest report, which, as you see on the screen, is Key Interventions: How New York Can Still Achieve Its Climate, Jobs, and Equity Mandates. For those who don't know me, my name is Zach Cunningham. I'm Assistant Director at the Climate Jobs Institute, and part of that role is that I lead our New York State team, who is responsible for the amazing report that we're going to be talking about tonight. Our mission at CJI, just as an introduction, is to guide New York's transition to a strong, equitable, and resilient clean energy economy by tackling the climate crisis, creating high-quality union jobs, confronting race and gender inequality, and building a diverse, equitable, and unionized workforce. We're part of Cornell University's ILR School, which was founded in 1945 as the New York State School of Industrial and Labor Relations. So many folks don't know this, but ILR is actually a state-sponsored school with a public service mission to work with policymakers, labor unions, folks from industry, and others to understand what's happening in the world around them so that they can take action. Part of that public service mission has been working with labor movement for decades, and other partners as well, to provide them with the knowledge, skills, and confidence that they need to really put forward a plan and to understand the biggest issues facing the world of work. About 2 decades ago, our founder and executive director, Lara Skinner, who sends her regrets that she can't be here with us today, along with some other leaders in labor and academia, some of them in this very room tonight, identified climate change as one of the biggest challenges facing working people and their communities, and really thought that as New York State's labor school, we need to be engaging on this issue. So Climate Jobs Institute was really set up to continue that decades-long tradition of the ILR school, and really to help unions and other partners navigate this historic transition to a high-road, low-carbon, clean energy economy. So as we gather here tonight as part of New York City's Climate Week festivities, I feel it's important to acknowledge the fact that the clean energy transition has gotten a lot more difficult in a lot of ways over the last few months, to state the obvious. But as federal government has pulled back a lot of support for not only climate action and clean energy, but also for equity measures and building high quality jobs through unionized workplaces, it's more important than ever that states like New York really are out front taking the lead on these issues. So there have been some real successes in New York, which we should celebrate. And many folks here also know that our state's, despite those successes, not making strides at the pace that we need to be to really tackle these critical issues. So it's our sincere hope that the report tonight and our discussion is going to be an inspiration for our policymakers, our union leaders, for environmental activists, everybody in the room, to try and have a proactive vision of how we can get back on track as a state. Before turning it over to my colleagues, I want to thank the whole team who helped make tonight possible. So I've got a laundry list here. Many folks at CJI had a hand in creating the report itself, including Linda Nguyen, Nate Lamb, Iris Packman, Bethany Figueroa, Hassan Ragi, as well as student fellows Eric Planky and Tover Feist. So give a round of applause to them. I also want to thank Katie Hayden, Joanna Lugo, Catherine Solis-Fonte, as well as the ILR Communications and Infrastructure Services team for helping to make this event tonight in this beautiful space a success. So give it up for them as well. And finally, we couldn't do this work as the Climate Jobs Institute without support from some key partners, including the state of New York. I want to give a special shout out to Assembly and Senate Labor Chairs Harry Bronson and Jessica Ramos for their support of our work, as well as our partners at the Climate Jobs National Resource Center, Climate Jobs New York, and all of the member unions of those organizations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Linda Nguyen to talk about our report.
Hi, everyone. Happy Climate Week. Thank you all for being here. I know it's always a jam-packed schedule. My name is Linda Nguyen. I am the lead researcher for this report. Today, okay, great. We'll start the evening off with a brief presentation, which will contextualize our report's findings. We'll then go into a moderated panel discussion followed by a Q&A, and then we'll end the evening with a reception in the cafe area. We have quite a bit to get through, so let's get started. Okay, so in 2019, New York passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or the CLCPA, setting goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, tackle environmental injustice, and create good union jobs. And at the time when it was passed, the CLCPA was lauded as the most ambitious climate target in the country, and it really set New York up as a national leader on climate action. The law mandates direct benefits to New York's disadvantaged communities. It requires prevailing wages, and it really prioritizes the creation of good union jobs. And so on this slide, you'll see all of the time-bound goals established by the law. They include both renewable energy development targets as well as decarbonization targets. But 6 years later, New York is running behind on its goals. We've met our distributed solar goals, but we're falling behind on our offshore wind and energy storage goals. And CGI Research projects New York will be 3 years behind its 70% renewable energy by 2030 goal. But we are seeing some progress on this front. This summer, NYSERDA released an RFP to procure more bulk energy storage. So that's promising, but there are still some challenges ahead. Uncertain federal leadership on climate action is resulting in things like stop work orders on offshore wind projects. And so this is all making our targets harder to reach. What's more, the CLCPA's lagging implementation is really exacerbating New York's affordability crisis, and New Yorkers are feeling this impact. Statewide housing prices are the highest they've been in the last 5 years. More families are getting to debt to afford everyday things like groceries, and residents are grappling with consecutive utility rate hikes, resulting in soaring energy prices. And we know low-income households are bearing the brunt of all of this. Low-income New Yorkers are spending 9% of their income on energy bills, and that's 3 times higher than the average New Yorker. And so these affordability indicators really point to a broader issue. Lagging implementation of the CLCPA is stunting the law's impact. And most importantly, it's hurting New York's working class. I'm going to pass the mic to Nate, my colleague, who will further contextualize the current moment.
Thank you, Linda. Good evening, everybody. I'm Nate Lamb. I'm one of the report co-authors. I'll talk a little bit about the context at the federal level. So over the past year, we've seen both legislatively and executively some significant steps backwards on both renewable energy and workers' rights. Some specific challenges are the cuts to Solar for All and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund from the federal government, threats to the low-income home energy assistance program, layoffs in the office that administers that program, and as Linda mentioned, threats to offshore wind specifically, which New York was relying heavily on for its clean energy transition, as well as a lot of union busting at the federal level. Thousands of federal workers have lost their collective bargaining agreements over the past several months. Really, I think that this highlights that this moment of divestment and backtracking means that New York needs to take the reins back and show some leadership in this political moment. And that's exactly what the key interventions report is targeted to do. So it's 10, short-term interventions that the state can take to continue to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to contribute some positive economic, social, and health benefits, and address longstanding inequities, as well as continuing to create and protect high-quality union jobs. I will explain some of the key interventions in a brief format. So the interventions broadly fit into 4 categories. The first is reimagining the clean energy economy. What we seek to answer in this category is how can we achieve deep decarbonization rapidly? Expanding public sector involvement looks at what it really means for New York to take on the mantle of leadership in this specific moment. Enhancing funding streams takes a lot of capital to drive a clean energy transition. How do we get that moving? And protecting hardworking New Yorkers. You know, in this moment where workers and the working class are facing threats to their power and their security, where can the state take action to safeguard that? Specifically for the clean energy economy section, we have 3 recommendations. The renewable energy goals and labor standards recommendation has a couple specifics, including increasing the state's solar construction target to 39 gigawatts by 2030, the state's energy storage target to 6.8 gigawatts by 2030, and specifically focusing in on 8-hour duration storage or longer, and also lowering, the prevailing wage threshold for renewable energy projects and aggregating them to make public procurement of renewable energy easier. For increasing transportation options, we looked at measures including reforms to transportation and infrastructure law, creating a public transportation construction authority to really address the problem that we've been seeing of it costing $1 billion to build a mile of subway in New York for the past couple decades, and also increasing funding for different transportation options, including but not limited to public transportation, but also things like pedestrianization and bike infrastructure as well. And I want to specifically highlight the housing crisis recommendation. So the ethos behind this recommendation is that denser towns and cities are more economically viable, they're more accessible, they're more energy efficient, and they are better distributors of amenities and utilities. So we targeted some recommendations, including zoning reform laws, establishing a main streets program that selectively upzones portions of New York's towns and villages to create a social center, but also create a true economic anchor for these upstate communities, and also creating a new social housing construction authority, specifically working to develop traditional public housing, but also collaborating with labor unions to build workforce housing, and also building limited equity cooperative housing. For the public sector portion, this focus is on the utility sector, primarily in power. So with reforming utilities, what we're seeking to do is strengthen utility regulation and governance structures, build a new public-private partnership for building decarbonization that is a lagging portion of this clean energy transition for the state, and we really need to step it up there specifically. Expanding public solar programs to every city and region in the state. Buying out utilities while maintaining existing collective bargaining agreements and preserving the right to strike for the workers, and operating those utilities as public power authorities if they are incapable of meeting the state's climate goals without things like service interruptions or exorbitant rate hikes, and also stabilizing the wholesale power sector. I want to dive in deeper on the NYPA recommendation specifically. So New York State is falling behind on its clean energy construction goals. NYPA can change that. In 2023, the state passed the Build Public Renewables Act that gives NYPA the authority to construct large-scale renewable energy projects. And we're encouraging NYPA to increase the renewable energy development target to 15 gigawatts by 2030, to deploy a local energy program that will develop distributed energy resources for our public and nonprofit sectors like state and local governments, for schools, for hospitals, for cooperative and municipal utilities, to establish a bulk power equipment procurement program to secure the state's clean energy technology supply chain and also ensure good labor standards in manufacturing as well, and to develop large-scale energy storage projects that enables renewable energy generation to accelerate the clean energy transition through addressing intermittency and also improving authority governance, specifically having a having the state legislature appoint a portion of NYPA's board because accountability is really the bedrock of good governance. And I would like to pass it back to my colleague Linda to discuss some more of the recommendations.
Thanks, Nate. Okay, let's talk about funding. So New York's clean energy transition could cost up to $15 billion every year. And that's a daunting price tag, especially considering federal divestment away from climate action. And so our team really wanted to think about how we could raise the revenue needed to do all of this critical work. So our first intervention is to pass a green public buildings bond. Buildings are responsible for the second highest share of emissions in the state. And so building decarbonization efforts could really make a significant impact towards statewide emissions reduction. The state's already doing a little bit of this work through the Decarbonization Leadership Program, which will construct highly efficient thermal energy networks at 15 state-owned facilities. But more funding is really needed to expand this work. And so a bond that funds thermal energy readiness upgrades and network construction could really expand the footprint of the Decarbonization Leadership Program. And attaching strong labor standards to these bond funds will help ensure the jobs created through these efforts will be good, family-sustaining, and well-paid jobs, which is what we want. So our second intervention in this category is to implement the New York Cap and Invest program, or NICI. We love acronyms here. So NICI is projected to generate between $6 to $12 billion each year. And that could really fill the gap left behind by federal funding cuts. And we could use that funding to invest in climate-safe infrastructure. And because we know NICI requires strong labor protections, the 28,000 jobs that are projected to be created through the program will be good, well-paid union jobs. For our last category, our team really wanted to prioritize the needs and futures of New York's working class. And so our first intervention is to make energy more affordable by lowering energy costs and increasing safety nets. This could look like utility bill discounts, progressive green rates, resuming a moratorium on electricity service shutoffs due to non-payment, and expanding energy affordability programs to cover more New Yorkers. Our second intervention is to develop pathways for union employment for disadvantaged communities. And we could do this by standardizing and investing in licensed pre-apprenticeship programs and supporting strong labor and equity standards for publicly funded projects. And then lastly, we are recommending to enhance protections for private sector workers. At CJI, we believe the clean energy transition must center workers. And that means expanding access to good union jobs and making sure those jobs are healthy and safe for those workers, right? But unfortunately, federal actions are leaving many workers unprotected. And while there are some protections for some workers in New York's private sector, many are still left without essential coverage. We have seen some progress on this front. The recently signed bill sponsored by Assembly Member Bronson and Senator Ramos, 8034A, I think, will help protect more workers, especially during a time of uncertain federal leadership on worker rights and when we have a defunded and immobilized NLRB. But New York could do more. And so we're recommending for New York to enact provisions within the PRO Act and establish our own state OSHA plan that goes beyond federal protections. And doing so could really help level the playing field for more workers across our state, which is essential right now. Okay, so with that, I'm concluding our presentation. Y'all did so good. Oh, thank you, that's so nice. It's our hope that our 10 recommendations can really inspire equitable state-led climate action that prioritizes the needs and futures of New York's working class. And now the fun part, I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague Iris Packman, who will lead us into a moderated panel discussion that will be followed by audience Q&A.
Thank you, Linda and Nate. I'm Iris Packman. I'm another co-author on the report and really happy to be here with all of you. Thank you for taking the time. I know Climate Week's been really busy. It's really important to be able to address climate as it affects equity, specifically workers, low-income communities, communities of color. I think it's a really important tie-in. So we appreciate everyone coming on out. And remember, there will be more food and drink after as well. So I just wanted to give you a reminder, we will have a Q&A at the end of this discussion. So keep your questions, and we have folks with microphones. So if you raise your hand at that time, they'll bring you a microphone. And then I'll invite you to come and catch us. If you couldn't get a question in during that session, we should all be milling about. So we're happy to talk with you after. So I just wanted to introduce our esteemed panelists. We have New York Assembly member Mikhail Szilagyi of Assembly District 22. She chairs both the New York State Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus, and is now also chairing the Local Governments Committee. So a lot on your plate. We appreciate you coming. We are also joined by Lori Wheelock, Executive Director and General Counsel of the Public Utility Law Project, or PULP. And I do want to note that Ms. Wheelock was appointed as a trustee to the NYPA board back in 2023. She is, however, appearing tonight in her official capacity as PULP's executive director and counsel, not as a representative for NYPA. So joining these two, we have Esther Rosario, who is executive director of Climate Jobs New York.
That's my old.
And Chris Erickson Jr., senior assistant business manager for IBW Local 3. So Assemblywoman Szilagyi, we'll start with you. As the chair of the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Caucus, you are championing policies to create a more equitable and sustainable environment for New Yorkers. Can you talk about some of your policy priorities, how they might help address the need to rapidly scale the build out of renewable energy in a sustainable way?
I first want to say happy Climate Week. Yeah, climate change is real. We believe in science, right? Want to make sure, we started off the week thinking that we're going to have a normal climate week. And unfortunately, we see the orange Cheeto saying that, climate change is a hoax and that the two-headed monster is immigration and climate change, which we all in this room, think the opposite, because we know that in New York State, we believe in immigration, we believe in the science, and we believe that communities of color need to be centered around climate change. And so for me, a just transition means that the families that bore the brunt of pollution and the climate crisis are centered, that they have access to clean air, clean water, that they have access to economic prosperity, and that they also can have access to low electrical bills, right? Utility bills. That's where I come from. And so when we talk about the priority bills of the Black, Hispanic, Puerto Rican, Asian Caucus, it's many. So I could sit here for hours and talk about what we're doing. And I want to give a shout out to our great labor chair who's sitting right here, Senator Ramos. Thank you so much for all that you do. For you, because you are a fighter, and I believe in everything that you do. When she comes to me, I say, okay, whatever you want. But I'm going to talk about three important things very quickly because I definitely want to hear from the other panelists. Number one, we need to push NYPA to make sure that they do the 15 gigawatts of power. They have the ability. No offense. I'll move my mic over here. It's something that they can do. They have a good credit rating, they have the capacity, they have the knowledge, and they are a state agency. So I do believe that we can push them to do what's right by New Yorkers. Also, I believe in utility reform. We need to center the ratepayers. We see that utilities are increasing, and we see some of these boards, and they don't represent the people. And so we need, in addition to changing the Public Service Commission, we also need to make sure that we have public power in so many places like Long Island and Hudson Valley. It's simple, it centers people, and ensures that we have checks and balances when it comes to these utility companies. And then lastly, it's making sure that when we implement some of these laws, the legislature and the governor has implemented so many of these great laws, or have passed these great laws but haven't implemented them. Come on, we need to do Nikki. We need to make sure that cap and invest comes through. And then we also have great initiatives like the TENNIS, which is the Utilities Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act, that is currently being deliberated. And we need to make sure that we have thermal energy networks throughout the state. So we passed a great law just the other day. Right now it's currently being deliberated. And, we went on the Climate Jobs Institute took us to Vancouver, where we saw district heating, and we saw it enacted in communities, especially communities of color and First Nation communities. They were getting access to not only clean energy, but they were getting access to lower utility bills, and it was centered around equity, around people who have been disadvantaged. We could do that. Our climate law says that we have to do that. So we as a society have to do that.
Yeah.
So that's it. There's just the three stuff for now.
Much, and we're going to dig into a lot of those too. Esther, I wanted to turn to you in thinking about how to get these kinds of policy priorities that the Assemblywoman described actually enacted and implemented, as she was saying. Your organization, the Climate Jobs New York, has been leading the fight to build an equitable, resilient, unionized clean energy economy in the state. And you unite issues of labor and climate and the environment at a time when there's a lot of scrutiny for talking about climate change, workers' rights, equity. So how do you advocate for these issues and work toward the goal of reducing emissions and fighting equality in a way that you find is politically effective?
Sure. So thank you for being here. As Iris pointed out, we're a union-led coalition that is really focused on putting all of these wonderful things that you see here at Cornell into practice. And we've been pretty successful in doing it. Started in the first Trump administration. We've been expanding labor standards to new renewable energy industries, making sure we're attaching apprenticeship requirements to any and all new funding that comes through to make sure that we're not missing the opportunity that exists in our clean energy transition. We really have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make sure that we're not just bringing in new work without making sure that they're family-sustaining jobs as we do that. So a lot of this legislation we couldn't have made possible without Senator Ramos here championing all of these bills through the Labor Committee. Again, it's really about implementing it now. So we're building out the coalition. We're making sure that more union members know how to speak this language, make sure that we're showing up to hearings, we're making sure that they know that there are union members that support this work, support the transition, even in a time when it's politically fraught to talk about, an energy transition. We are out here making sure that we are boots on the ground, having conversations in communities, and centering trusted messengers. It's difficult, obviously, to talk about backing off from the climate messaging in Climate Week. But in order to get some of this stuff done, we've had to really take a more inclusive approach to talk about energy independence. So in July, we did our first annual Energy Independence Month, and we centered worker stories in clean energy from all sectors. We had teachers, we had building managers, we had IBEW members, we had our pipe fitters, we had everybody talking about climate, but not just talking about it in the lens of what this energy transition means for the environment, right? We talked about it as an economic driver for their communities. And also they talked about the wonderful things they're able to do with their families now that they're in steady work with good benefits and a path to the middle class. So that's sort of what we're centering in our fight, and we're going to keep doing that.
Explaining that, painting that picture, it's really powerful. So the Climate Jobs Institute recently studied the non-union solar workforce in New York State. We found significant gender and racial disparities, especially with regard to pay and benefits. And union jobs, in contrast, pay more and help close the gender and racial pay gaps and provide quality benefits. So Chris, as a leader in the IBEW, I know you see the impact of being a union member every day. Can you explain about the union difference and what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you to Climate Jobs for putting this report together and keep moving the ball down the field. I want to acknowledge our opportunity as IBW Local 3, a building trades union, to have the chance to be in these rooms with so many different people and groups. I think that says a lot about our leadership, that we've supported this initiative for a long time, and that we're willing to have sometimes challenging conversations about how we get there. But being in the room, I think, is the first step. And we've been in these rooms for a long time, and we look forward to helping implement all these things. Solar is certainly one example where there may be good intentions, and we know based on the report how much solar work needs to be done to help reach New York State's climate goals. But there's also an industry that has become a low-wage, dead-end kind of industry full of bad actors. And certainly the union difference is key. A lot of our members are here tonight, rank and file members that hopefully you can pick out of the crowd and talk to, and they'll tell you better than I can about the impact of having a good union job, the wages, the benefits, the safe conditions, being able to go home to the family that you're able to support because you were able to work safely. And the solar industry, it's a lot of transient workforces, a lot of pay discrepancies. When you're a Local 3 journey person, you survive your 5.5-year apprenticeship program, and you're going to make the same wages as the person that's working next to you. Whether I have my journey person status for 6 months and they may be in the industry for 40 years, we make the same pay. Whether you're a woman, a man, a person of color, you're earning the same wages because you went through the same apprenticeship program and you're delivering for that employer. So that alone stands out. That's something we're proud of. Our training, our certifications, our apprenticeship program, and hopefully we can get to some of those details. But it's not just about one industry in the clean economy either. We want our apprentices to learn solar, but we also want them to learn fire alarm systems and all the other facets of construction electrical work, because then they're not just making $18 an hour doing solar installations for as long as they can stick that out, but they can transition to other parts of our industry, earn those wages, have a career in the middle class, and earn a pension down the road.
Thank you. And the build out of energy, we've referred to the impact on the working class and middle class. I mean, all of us are energy consumers too. So Lori, your organization, the Public Utility Law Project, advocates for low-income utility consumers to help ensure fair and affordable access to service. As every resident of the state can tell you, our utility bills are skyrocketing, and 1 in 4 New Yorkers is considered energy burdened, which means more than 6% of the household income actually goes to pay for energy costs. So what does that look like in reality for millions of New York families?
Yeah, thank you, Iris, and thank you, everyone. You know, to CJI, thanks for reaching out to Pulp and interviewing our small but mighty team. There are 13 of us that cover the entire state, and many people know Pulp for the work we do in rate cases. So when Con Edison or National Grid want to increase rates, they have to file a case, and Pulp will intervene, and we fight on behalf of low-income utility customers. We also do policy. But I think the area we have the deepest impact is direct consumer help. We have people call our team every single day, and I have Kelly and Patrick here with me, and we help people who are in a crisis. They call us and they are in dire straits. You know, the numbers are astounding, but the stories we hear every day are, you know, real life. The utilities have to report how customers are doing financially. And so in New York, we have these monthly reports. And in July, there were 1.3 million accounts. That's not people, that's not households, that's accounts that were behind on their utility bills by 60 days or more, and they owed $1.9 billion. That's extremely large. Over 431 shutoff notices were sent out to people telling them, hey, you're at risk, you might lose your utilities. And 44,000 shutoffs happened. Those are statistics, but again, we see that real life. And so on Wednesday, yesterday, we had customer O contact us from Delhi, which is in like Western Catskills. So rural community, customer O, older adult, electricity has been shut off for 2 days. So her cell phone battery was dying. And she reaches us and she's extremely upset. Her son has asthma, so he can't use the nebulizer. And it was 4:30 and she was panicked. She's like, what are we gonna do? Like, I can't go another night without electricity. I'm older, I'm scared of falling. What do I do? I called my county social services. They're telling me to apply for something online, but I don't have internet because I don't have electricity. And we were like, don't worry, we got this. We got forms, we contacted the utility, we worked out a payment agreement. She got turned back on within an hour and she was able to go into the night, being able to make food, take care of her son. But this is what we see every day. And unfortunately, the bias we hear is customers don't want to pay. And that's not true. The utility rates are extremely, extremely high. And New York, we are New York. We can do more. The legislature, which we're so thankful for, has so many creative ideas to look at costs and really help elevate what is just and reasonable. And there's a lot of bills out there that can help us with that. And so seeing reimagine our utilities in this report means so much to Pulp on that policy side, but it helps us elevate those real life stories and push back on the bias that we're hearing from the utility companies.
Wow. Thank you for painting that picture. I think that really helps bring it home of what it means. These are not just statistics, these are real families. So when we think about building out a clean energy future, a major component that we've discussed is building union jobs. And so, Chris, I wanted to talk to you a little bit more, if you could kind of explain, because I think there's a mix in the room of how much folks are familiar with union terminology, especially. But in the report and in our recommendations, we often recommend that people, that projects have project labor agreements. So I was wondering if you could just explain what that is, a PLA in short, because again, we love acronyms in both industries, and why that's a meaningful requirement for clean energy jobs, more so than just a prevailing wage requirement, which is essentially a higher minimum wage. What is the difference and why is a PLA so important?
There are a lot of acronyms in that report, and that would be my one critique, to put a little index there. Doing a lot of homework, but excuse me. So project labor agreements are basically a pre-job agreement negotiated between the building trades, maybe locally in the state or in the city, and the customer or the contractor that set the terms and conditions for either that specific job or potentially work covered by an agency or an authority. These have been proven to increase the time the job gets done. They've been proven to reduce the cost to the job. Things come in under budget and faster. You don't have to be only a union contractor to be party to a project labor agreement. But if you're a non-union contractor working on a project labor agreement job, you have to follow the terms and conditions that are set, which are normally the union wages and benefits and work rules. And the better part to these things is that they're not only leveling the playing field, but they are adding things like community benefit agreements to the project labor agreement. They may require local hire, which means wherever this job is, certain zip codes around that job, there's obligations to hire people from those neighborhoods. Sometimes that means people who don't have a job are going to have an opportunity there. It may also mean, like with my union, we have members that live in that community that now have the opportunity to work on that job. Normally, there's the obligation for registered apprenticeship programs, which are registered with the Department of Labor. They have certain terms, again, that the apprentices and the program have to meet. They're not just some fly-by-night program where somebody says, hey, you're in an apprenticeship. We're going to teach you for 2 weeks how to do this job and put you on the job. Our apprenticeship program is 5.5 years. You don't earn a lot of money as a first-year apprentice. You make $18 an hour, but you have the same medical as the journey person. You're earning pension credits. You have other benefits. and you're getting to go to school learning electrical theory. You get a college degree in Local 3's apprenticeship program, and you work your way towards your journey person status. So the project labor agreements certainly add so much value to the job. They streamline everything. Prevailing wages, as you mentioned, they're also key in terms of labor standards. Whenever there's public money, it's a public works job or there's public money on a private job, the obligation to pay the prevailing wage is important. That means fly-by-night contractors from other states can't come in, undermine the wage standards. However, if a non-union contractor is doing a prevailing wage job, all they have to do is pay that worker the same amount as the union rate. So if an electrician's earning $132 an hour, which is wages and benefits, that non-union worker is getting $132 per hour in cash in the paycheck. It's not going into the benefits that are then ultimately getting reinvested in the community. There's no tie to any of those benefit plans. So both are strong. They're great tools, and project labor agreements can certainly increase the value to that project.
Thank you for explaining that. So Esther, having talked through what the role of PLAs is for construction projects, what are some mechanisms that the state can use to raise standards for workers outside of construction? So in the supply chain, for example, the clean energy supply chain, in operations and maintenance, in those other fields that are also implicated.
Sure. So obviously the PLAs and apprenticeship requirements and raising labor standards works for the construction, but for operations and maintenance, the language we use is labor peace agreements. So if you sign a labor peace agreement, that means when it's post-construction, the workers have the right to organize. And as of now, South Fork went up with project labor agreements for the construction side. Operations and maintenance did not get the labor peace agreement. Same thing with Empire Wind 1. So if you are talking to some developers and you want to, let them know that we need to talk about operation and maintenance, we have some work to do there. We often focus so much on getting these new projects up that we forget what happens afterwards when you have to make sure that it's, again, from shovel to broom. We're creating family sustaining jobs, and that labor peace agreement is the way to do it. And we're working to get those agreements in play.
Thank you. And so, Lori, now thinking again about the low-income New Yorkers, potentially, operations and maintenance workers who aren't covered by, collective bargaining agreements, for example, looking at the federal cuts right now that we're seeing coming down to programs that are not directly connected to energy, right? SNAP, the food assistance, Medicaid, cuts to people's healthcare. What impact do you anticipate that will have on low-income New Yorkers, and how do you think that will affect what you're seeing on your hotline?
Yeah, I mean, everything is connected, right? It's a domino effect, and you cut one program and it affects an entire household stability. Everything from financial to mental, like, let's be very honest, it feels very targeted because it is. And so, we see people every single day who are, a year ago already struggling with, what bill do I pay? Every single day, it's, I need to get my medicine this week. I can pay maybe part of my rent next week, and how do I afford my utilities? So we are really worried. We're seeing these significant cuts on the federal level, and there's a lot of uncertainty about other programs. And so fortunately, we are New York. New York does have other existing programs, and so it's really going to be about shoring them up, fostering and leaning in. We need every agency, from the Office of Temporary Disability and Assistance, Department of Health, to the Department of Public Service, to work together. And where there are these federal cuts, make sure that we are sharing those resources and also connecting. So one of the things we're really excited about, again, as we're trying to look broadly, is data matching, which the Assembly member was our champion on. She fought so hard to get, a few years ago, this program where the utilities would data match with the Office of Temporary Disability Assistance. OTDA has the records. They know who our low-income New Yorkers are. And so if they can data match with the utilities, it saves that household so much time, so much work to go and fill out all these applications that half the time are duplicative anyways. We want to build off of that creativity and expand it. Who else? Department of Tax and Finance. They also have a lot of state records, right? How many of us file, tax returns? So thinking creatively, when the federal government gives up on us, we here in New York need to step up and find ways to lean on each other, be creative. And so very excited to see what happens in 2026.
Yeah, that's great to think about, and so excited about that bill as an opportunity to work together. And so on the affordability note, housing affordability is another major concern throughout New York State. Small town, big city, I think everyone will tell you their rent or their mortgage costs are incredibly high. And this is obviously not felt equitably either. 55% of Hispanic households, 50% of Black households, 48% of Asian households, and 31% of white households have experienced some level of housing insecurity as a result. So, Assembly Member, what are some interventions that the state can take to improve the housing stock? And how can the legislature work with localities to support reforms that can address this crisis?
Whenever someone talks about housing affordability, I think about that guy who's like, the rent's too damn high, He lives in us all every day. And so, I do believe that there's a world where we can cut emissions, we can cut costs, but also build housing. And in my new capacity as chair of local governments, it's become more important for me to figure out how we can work with different localities to build housing, because it's not just building the housing, but it's also talking about the zoning rules that exist in different, in the city and outside of New York City. And so I do believe there's a paradigm where we can build housing, and I first want to acknowledge one of my other colleagues, Judy Griffin, who's here. I don't want to get in trouble. Assemblywoman Judy Griffin here. Yeah. I want to acknowledge her being here. Oh, Anna Kellis is here. Where's Anna? Oh, I love this woman. Assemblywoman Kellis. Oh, goat when you talk about the environment. I want to acknowledge her here. Thank you so much. When we talk about upzoning, there is a world where we can build with the characters of communities. We can go to communities and have conversations about building housing, but acknowledge that, yes, we do have to fix the infrastructure. We do have to look at what the community wants, what they desire. For myself, being a Long Islander, people always talk about transit-oriented development and seeing how we can build by our transit system so that folks can go into the city, but also live in the suburban life, but in apartments or in condos. And so I do believe that there's a paradigm where we can build, but it's going to take the whole of government to be a part of that. So when we talk about the social housing construction authority, it's something that we need to champion next year. We need to talk about how we can build workforce housing, income smart housing, so that folks can live and not be rent burdened. It's possible, but we just need the political will, and we also need to step back and just sit and analyze that folks are leaving New York State. And it's not the billionaires and the millionaires that are leaving. It's working class individuals who can't afford to live here anymore. And so how can we retain those people? Is by making sure we look at the paradigm of affordability, which includes housing. And then most important, talking about that state and local partnerships. We have to talk to these village officials, we have to talk to these county officials and bring them aboard and have conversations with them. Because for me, like I said, I live on Long Island. Many of them are NIMBY. You can't stop that. They're political. They don't care. They don't really care about the working class individuals. But many of them do want to build housing. They do want to keep young people here on the island or upstate New York or in the city. They do want to keep families. And so let's talk. Let's have a conversation. But we need to make sure that there's smart subsidies. We need to make sure that it's built with union labor, so it's good paying jobs. And then we also need to make sure it reflects the character of communities. And I believe we can do all that.
Thank you. Yes. So you talked about upzoning and transit-oriented development, and all of that has the potential to create a lot of jobs. And so I was wondering, Chris, if you could help explain some of the types of work that upzoning creates and how to ensure that that would create local and union work in the various localities.
The one thing that's kind of, I mean, this mayor's race has certainly kind of lit the fuse on the need for housing. It's nice to talk about housing and how you're going to build it. Honestly, the residential market in New York City has been non-union since the late 1980s. And it's become piecemeal, real fast, start with two-family homes, 6-story buildings, and now non-union is capable of building 50-story towers. And the financing of that housing has always been the part that they couldn't figure out, how to build it union, pay good wages and benefits, but then make money in that project. So a lot of the focus lately has been on middle class and working class housing, which for the longest time, our members were almost victim of making good money, but not great money, where they made too much money to afford low income housing and they didn't make enough money to afford market rate housing. So there are a number of different funds now that are focusing on that and potential projects where we talk about the circular value of our benefits. Our pension funds are investing in different housing and infrastructure funds to focus on working class and middle class housing, which is significant. When we think about our experience in Local 3 in the late 1940s and early 50s, members came back from the war, they had jobs, there was nowhere to live. We built a neighborhood called Elecchester. Limited equity housing, which is now cooperatives. We built 2,400 affordable apartments for our members, and they were able to save money, start a family, and then move out within the 5 boroughs, not jump to Long Island. You know, now members, apprentices are still living with their parents. People are moving to central Suffolk County, not even eastern Nassau, or they're going to Pennsylvania. And the quality of life is that much worse when they have to commute for 4 hours a day. So certainly we want our workers and members to live in the 5 boroughs where we work at. I talked about our apprentices, 1,200 apprentices at any time. 50% of our apprentices are women and people of color, and they come through direct entry programs that are based in New York City. They're first generation members that now have the opportunity to be in Local 3, and they live in the 5 boroughs. So we need to address this. So I don't have an answer to your question. I kind of circled a whole lot of things there, but certainly workforce housing is critical to the future of the strength of the city, and certainly in towns and cities throughout the state. When you talk about what drove work and people to be able to afford housing, it was a college campus or a manufacturing facility or a fossil fuel power plant. And when one of those things closed, that town is decimated. So we're still seeing that now. We talk about the impact of just transition and what the future looks like. But certainly finding good jobs where people make good wages to afford their housing is key to the strength of the city and the state.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Love the vision.
Get a clap for no answer.
So Esther, our report identified a significant gap between the state's renewable energy goals and the reality of what we're achieving at this point. We've referenced the federal government's, stop work orders on offshore wind. So where are you seeing the greatest potential to try to fill in the gaps, especially with renewable energy and the potential jobs that could be lost if we don't build out at the scale that's necessary?
Sure. I mean, I think the states, and I think you've heard it throughout the report, have a tremendous amount of power now to actually continue to keep going towards our goals, right? We really need to, we're, again, to quote the president, we're the stupid people in the room that are making the decisions. We need to make the right decisions to make sure that we're still marching ahead. So yeah, I mean, offshore wind might be delayed, but we know these projects take years to come online, both in the permitting process, but also just in development and in the, in the RFP process. So what can we do now to make up for, the time we're going to lose leasing new plots of lease areas because the federal government does not want to permit them, right? How can we, keep building out our ports to make sure that, again, when we when we get more permits down here, that we have an industry to support it? How can we continue to push on transmission? We know that building out transmission means that we're going to be connecting it to renewable energy, right? So how can we, maybe it's not, again, a huge announcement of a wind farm, but I'd say, bringing some transmission online, some grid upgrade money into our system means we're marching towards progress, even if it doesn't mean we're permitting more gigawatts of offshore wind. I'd say thermal energy networks, we heard it here. Waste energy is very exciting. How can we, again, de-silo the work so that, when we are addressing our affordable housing crisis, that we're really thinking thoughtfully about how we're opening up the ground and making sure we're building out district heating systems right away instead of after the fact. It will save us money and also it will get us to our goals, right? So I do think there's a way in which that we can continue to meet the moment and not delay our progress, but we have to be thoughtful about it. I don't think we can be in our feelings. We have to make hard decisions about what needs to be funded, and especially in a time when we're going to be up against pretty horrible budget seasons and cycles in the next 2 years, being thoughtful about what we're advocating for, given all of the cuts that are going into our education system, our hospital system, what makes sense for us to do in year 1, year 2, year 3 of a horrible, toxic federal administration, to make sure we're righting the ship and we're ready to go once, hopefully, he's out of office.
Sit delicately.
Got right out.
And Assembly Member, we talked about, the urgency here, the sense that NYPA needs to be building more as an opportunity for something that the state can do now while we're sort of waiting. So NYPA recently released a new target of 6.6 gigawatts. Your caucus has called for 15 gigawatts. That's also what we're recommending. So why isn't NYPA setting a more ambitious goal? And what will it take to move this from a goal to reality?
I also want to thank you all for coming up with the report because it really gives us a hope and a guideline to advocating for our communities. Because sometimes, we be all over the place, but having a report really focuses us on. And we need to be focused in this moment because we know that folks at NYPA, they're apprehensive at being ambitious. And I get it, it's a state agency, they have, rules and regs, they want to be a fiduciary, but this is not a time to be safe.
Right.
This is a time to be ambitious. This is a time to protect New Yorkers and to push back against federal intervention. And so I do believe that we can build public capacity. I want to make sure that NYPA, pairs with renewables and builds short-term and long-term storage goals and really pumps into the fact that we can do it. When we went to Vancouver, and I thank the Climate Jobs Institute for taking us to different localities and locations to look at what's happening, best practices. And when we went to Vancouver, we saw hydroelectric. We saw all these district heating networks. We saw possibility. And the society wanted it. People wanted that. And I believe that New Yorkers do. And so we have to really galvanize our resources. We have to really make sure our voices are heard so that we can get NYPA to get to that 15 gigawatts. They have the ability to do it. They have the financing to do it. Let's get it done. We also need to make sure that we fix our utilities, delivery and incentive programs. A lot of these utilities are lobbying or pushing for these rate cases with ratepayer money, which is crazy. They're using our own money to fight against us and to increase our utility bills. So we have legislation in which I carry to force them to only use money that they have, not ratepayer money. Don't use my money to fight against me to raise our electric bill. So let's stop their lobbying on ratepayer money. And, just there's so many I could stay here for hours talking about this. I know there's a reception, so I don't want to. But look, there's high demand for EVs, and we see that EVs right now, the benefit and the support is really for those who are wealthy, and the low income communities are not getting access to electric vehicles and charging stations. So we need to fix that paradigm. We need to focus on low income communities and make sure that we're building electric, but making sure that our communities get access to that. When you have money, it's easy to be able to get all these cool bells and whistles, but when you're trying to survive, you don't get access to that. But making sure the subsidies and the programs are targeted for low-income communities, communities of color, marginalized communities, and building that focus. We passed a climate law that said that 30 to 40% of the money should be given to disadvantaged communities. The legislature and the governor believed in it at that time, and we need to make sure that we push that. So really, you have this report. I encourage you to send it to your friends and family, email it out, put it on social media. We need to get organized as communities. We need to get grassroots as communities, and we also need to get aggressive. Because as everyone said here, the federal government is after us, and we have state sovereignty, so let's lead in New York State.
So the assembly member teed this up really nicely, Lori. I'm putting it to you. Okay. So what sorts of reforms do you hope to see in New York to address these concerns, to control costs of energy, improve customer service, respond to the increased demand that we're seeing with AI and data centers? What can we hope to achieve?
So I could also be here all night, but I will not. I think, again, the theme, I think one of the many principles tonight is to be brave and to be bold. And in New York, the Supreme Court has also said that with the utilities, the rates that are being charged are supposed to be just and reasonable. Think about those words, just and reasonable. That's really, really broad, right? We can play with that a lot. Think about us as consumers, think about them as the utilities. We are doing more with less. They should do more with less. And so there's so many creative ideas and ways to restrict what they're charging us. So if you pull up your Con Ed, your NYSEG bill later, you're going to see something on there called the basic service charge. It's something we're always charged. And it can range from $20 to $30. It's like before you turn on your light switch, they ask for that amount of money. It's like going to the pump if you don't have an EV, and they ask for $20 before you even put the gas in the tank. That should be restricted. California looked at doing equitable fixed charges where it decreases based on your income. The lower your income, the lower the fixed charge. There's so many ways to be creative with that. We heard about the utility costs. They charge us for attorneys and experts to raise our rates. They also charge us for executive compensation, bonuses, things like that. Should they be doing that right now when people can barely feed their family and keep their lights on? So we are so excited because there is a universe out there. And I think from Pulp, we feel supported in bringing these ideas to the public, to the legislature, and talking about it and saying it's time. It's time to act. It's time to get, brave and cut these costs, because it really is the only way to bring them down. They just keep going up.
Yeah. And just as a follow-up to that, are there reforms that you would like to see that would affect the responsiveness of the Public Service Commission?
Yes. So right now there is a bill that would look to add another commissioner to the commission, and it restricts the fact that any commissioners being considered moving forward not have been working for a utility for the last 2 years, and instead increase experience. So consumer advocacy, for one, And then another bill that we support, which is another one of the Assemblywomen's, is intervenor funding. So groups like Pulp, we are small but mighty, but there are community-based organizations all across the state who have ideas and thoughts, but they don't have the funding to go into these rate cases and policy proceedings to fight for that change. And so the intervenor bill is essentially equity. It would give them that chance to get costs reimbursed. We saw a small, but again, mighty nonprofit called Communities for Local Power in the Hudson Valley. They've been getting involved with Central Hudson, and they tried to hire an attorney, and it cost them thousands of dollars to participate in that rate case, but they did it, and they were amazing. And if they had the same kind of ability that the utilities do, I can't imagine what change they'd be able to push forward. And so again, we're just very grateful that here in New York, we have people who are thinking creatively and fighting for us.
Yeah, great. So now transitioning to the workforce build out that's necessary as we do part of this, the energy transition. And Chris, you've spoken, you've talked about the 5.5-year apprenticeship program. You've also mentioned pre-apprenticeship. And I'm wondering if you can describe for folks what the building trades, especially your union, IBW, is doing to train up the next generation of clean energy workers, particularly from within the disadvantaged communities, environmental justice communities. How are you kind of reaching out? And also, what are those programs looking like?
Sure. So the pre-apprenticeship direct entry programs. So direct entry means you join a program, you get a couple of skills, and then you have access to join our apprenticeship. Big picture, there's still demand to join the electrical apprenticeship program. Times are different. We still probably get a bad rap about the generational access. And for a long time, it was father, son, and it was exclusive. I would tell you in Local 3, that hasn't been the case in decades. I don't speak for every local, but we have intentionally provided access for people from different divisions. We had a class of apprentices back in the 60s where we had a manufacturing division with 10,000 members, predominantly Hispanic. And their sons and some daughters were able to join the construction division. So there was still generational access, but it was challenging. That's been different for a long time. There's still a high demand to join our apprenticeship program. We get 4,000 letters to apply every 3 years. And over the course of that process, maybe only 1,000 people over those 3 years will be able to pass a test, interview, get ranked, and get sent to work. The direct entry programs are key because they provide access to people to kind of come in separate from that program. So construction skills, which is in conjunction with the New York City public schools, new non-traditional employment for women, pathways to apprenticeship, P2A, and helmets to hard hats. Those are 4 programs that are aligned with the building trades that 40% of every one of our apprenticeship classes every 6 months come from those programs, 10% each. And that's how we've grown to 50% people of color, first generation Local 3 members who are now on the path to provide that generational access to their children. So the direct entry programs are key. I talked about project labor agreements. There's a NYCHA project labor agreement. Part of the language in the NYCHA PLA says residents get access to direct entry the same way. So that is another benefit. Above and beyond the apprenticeship, we provide skills training and certifications throughout the rest of our members' careers. When you talk about clean energy, EV and EV charging infrastructure, battery storage, solar, offshore wind, lighting and building retrofits, grid and electrical infrastructure, transmission, clean transportation, these are all aspects. A lot of this stuff didn't exist 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So we're always adapting. Offshore wind is a good example where we have made every effort over 12 years now to be engaged and embedded in the offshore wind industry that, don't forget, is made up of oil and gas companies, mainly from Europe, who are in this industry not to save the planet, but to continue to profit as the world transitions. It has been a fight with these developers to get the expectations that the unionized building trades have in New York City and up and down the East Coast, that these jobs need to be good union jobs with benefits and wages, not $20 a day and 3 meals and a bed to sleep in for 6 weeks at a time. So we've taken on significant training in-house to get people trained for all the different certifications that there's a new one every week. GWO is one of them. I think it's the General Wind Organization. It's a 40-hour class that we couldn't get our members trained. We had to send people to New Orleans. 2 nights before, we heard there was 2 spots in Blackpool, England. Do you have anybody ready? It was a nightmare. So we looked at property we own with a summer camp for the kids of Local 3, and as trustees of an educational fund, decided to be willing to spend almost $5 million to build our own training center for GWO. During the Biden administration, we won a grant for $3.8 million to help fund that. That's now up in the air. So now we have to have a trustee meeting on Wednesday to talk about the viability of this project, to train our members and whether it's feasible to spend their money for an industry that we don't know where it's going to go. But we've taken it on in-house, adjusting our program certifications. The workforce development within the unions is bar none. The electrical and the building trades apprenticeship program is the gold standard. I think it's only second to the United States military in terms of scope and money spent, and it's all funded by our industry. Our employers pay to train the next generation. We don't need grants to fund this. We're not a non-union company, putting somebody through a 2-week program and saying, you're good luck. So that's how we're operating differently. And certainly the workforce development is something that we're proud of and we'll continue to adapt. And the more crazy ideas you can come up with in your reports, the more we can adjust and certainly teach the next generations.
Yeah, thank you. That's a hopeful note. So we're going to open it up now for audience questions. So please raise your hand if you have a question, and we have some folks with microphones who can bring them over to you. In the yellow shirt here.
Hi, my name is Brandy Brooks. I am from a Boston-based, yes, it's okay, an environmental and racial justice consulting firm called One Square World, and we focus on deep community process in the development of climate and environmental policy. I am loving this report and loving how much equity is being centered in this conversation. And as a community organizer, I also hold by the "nothing about us without us is for us" mantra. And so I am curious, because as we know, we often come into these policy rooms and we're not in conversation directly and in planning directly with folks who we are working for ostensibly. And so I would love to hear from each of you how you are actually working to shift the dynamics of these conversations so that low-income communities of color, women, other marginalized groups of New Yorkers are actually in these rooms and these reports and these conversations about policy development, about the details, because we know the devil is in the details on the actual accessibility of these programs, and about accountability of implementation. Also recognizing that the movements that we are all here for, whether you're talking about labor, immigration, women, were led by the people themselves who were most directly impacted.
Would like to start.
Everybody looked at me.
Yeah.
I'll speak briefly. I don't want to take up too much time, but the one thing is intentionally making relationships with the community groups and engaging with groups like in New York City, like Align, the League of Conservation Voters, We Act, and making sure that people understand that we're not the bad guys that a lot of people expect us to be. Not only for the exclusivity I talked about in the past, but also people blame, electrical generation for the environment. And we acknowledge that a lot of the jobs that our members did for a long time have added to this, and that's hard. But certainly creating those relationships and working with groups like Climate Jobs New York and with the Climate Jobs Institute and being in spaces like this to have those conversations and to work on that trust to then create the avenues for access like I talked about, so that way there is real implementation there. And the thing that the community groups don't always understand is that access to the job doesn't mean that those jobs are going to exist. So for us, the union doesn't bid on work. We don't solicit work. Our signatory contractors have to win those jobs, and they're the ones that hire those apprentices. We would love to take in as many people as we can to join our ranks. But when we have unemployment because the work that gets let out by a public agency isn't covered by a project labor agreement, we can't hire someone off the street. So that's the complicated rub for us, but certainly creating the relationships and trying to work together is something that we're going to continue to do.
And I'll sort of piggyback off of that. Obviously, we are a union-led coalition, and I mean that in every sense of the word, that we really take the time to make sure we're checking in with all of our union affiliates that come from the UFT, the 32BJ, IBW, and so many others that I am totally missing, and I hope that I'm not offending anybody. We make sure we're checking in with them and that we're not overstepping and we're stepping in tandem with them. And just as a reminder, right, the union members are everywhere. They are part of the community, and I think that sometimes because it's, you know, the union bosses that are often at, you know, at the panels or at the roundtables or the ones negotiating, that we sometimes forget that union members are also part of marginalized communities, that they have a voice and a say, and they you know, let it known that they want this work to continue. And a lot of times, you know, we fight each other, but really we're not, you know, the enemy is not us, it's the developer, it's the industry. And oftentimes because, you know, we're more accessible, get the short end of the stick, but we're open to conversations, and I think are more aligned on a lot than we'd think.
And just quickly, you know, when we talk about the policy room here in New York State, we're at a unique point. Out of 213 legislators, about 75 of them are people of color, and more so are people from marginalized communities. And we are in the policy rooms. When you talk about 3 people in a room now, 2 of them are from marginalized communities. We are now chairs of committees. We are having the policy levers. And now we have the opportunity to center our communities. And so never in the history of New York State have we actually are controlling the legislature. So we have the ability to center equity, to center gender, to center all the issues that are important to us. And it's an exciting time to be there. But again, the enemy is not us. It's the developers, it's the industry, it's the conservatives, it's those people who don't believe in the science. And they have control sometimes of the media. And so we as communities need to make sure that we're educating folks on the ground and telling them that don't listen to the negatives, look at the positives. We are actually changing our community for the better, but we just got to stand in solidarity with each other.
And for Pulp, just some of the words that come to mind are comfort, support, you know, listening. We do a lot of outreach to other community-based organizations, safe spaces. One of the things we do, we had one, I think, at 3:00 today, when we do a new meet and greet with an organization, we ask, who else should we meet with? You know, and trying to work on that comfort to go in and, you know, meet from the ground up. And it's also, you know, listening to the people that we help every day. Like, they're our greatest teachers, and we see, you know, the bureaucracy, the red tape, the injustice in a lot of what they go through. And I'll often go back to them. You know, we get them through the emergency, but then maybe we'll have a meeting. I'll be like, hey, guess what? You remember how they shut you off and it was 94 degrees out? We're gonna do a bill. We're gonna do a policy piece. We've done this in a rate case. And so we go back and we, coalesce and talk to them. And it's not all of them, like some of them, they got to get through that moment. But we do have conversations and they inspire us with the ideas of what will actually help on the ground too.
That's great. You have a question? Oh, great.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the great discussion. I have one question that came from the report, which I don't know if you'll be answering or maybe Linda, but it said something about a New York State OSHA action plan. I'm just curious what that means and what that actually would look like of New York State kind of having a symbiotic relationship with OSHA and implementing that. But my other question really has to do with workforce and opportunities, especially in the union trade. So my company, Soulful Synergy, I'm a co-founder. We do train people for jobs and careers. My business partner is a former carpenter with the union, had a great union career. We would love to train people for union jobs, right? The realistic current circumstances, we speak to a lot of unions that tell us they're not getting as much work, right? Because as you mentioned, the enemy, as you call them, the developers, the other folks are, underbidding them or outbidding them for jobs. They don't have as much work, both in the city and in Westchester, where we do a lot of work. I'm curious to know what levers is the government using when they're giving out tax abatements or taxpayer money to incentivize developments and developers to come to their communities. They're giving them tax breaks and incentives and kickbacks or whatever you want to call them, but not forcing them to, again, use union labor or use local hires or, ensure that people are trained at a certain standard. So I'm curious to know what are some of the things that maybe you all are doing to look at that so that we're ensuring that people are getting livable wages and access to opportunities in union jobs. And what should we be doing on the community and the front lines to ensure that people are getting opportunities and making sure that they're using their voice to encourage some of these things that they maybe don't understand the full dynamics. We're hired by a number of municipalities to recruit and train people. But when you go to the developers to say, hire these people, they have a whole different story for you of how, it's actually going to work. And so where is the muscle to hold developers and contractors' feet to fire when municipalities and cities are giving them money and tax breaks to be in that area?
One of you want to take the second part of
The second part of.
Yeah, I know for us, I'll take the second part of the question, like what government is doing. We do have several proposals to ensure that there's project labor agreements, even for us, like, for example, school construction right now, contractors are underbidding, they're misclassifying workers. And so we're proposing legislation to make sure that there's project labor agreements for school construction. And, millions of dollars is spent on schools constructions, taxpayer money. And to your point, it's about accountability. It's about making sure that there's transparency. And so we're pushing for legislation for that. There's similar legislations in other places. We passed a SUNY PLA. There's a lot of conversations around there. And I just really appreciate, and I want to always give homage to Speaker Hasty and Majority Leader Stewart-Cousins for empowering the legislature to really be aggressive in making sure we're looking at subsidies. So we've changed a lot of the housing subsidies to be more adaptable and consider union labor, but there's so much more to do. So I would love to hear from you about how we can just fix the issues to make sure that you can do what you need to do, so that folks can get hired, so that they can get economic prosperity.
I'll say it's difficult to operate in a space where everybody looks for a loophole, because a lot of times what happens is we'll pass, for instance, the 485X, right? And it has a threshold of X amount of units. And then the bid is for 1 unit less than that. And then they don't have to, build with prevailing wage or build with unions, right? Same thing is happening in solar, right? We're seeing solar going non-union because they're bidding like 1, I don't even know what the word would be, gigawatt or 1.5, whatever, under what the threshold would be to make sure that the unions have a fighting chance for that work. So there's a little bit of like a okay, at a certain point, there are good developers and good contractors that are not trying to look for a loophole. As of now, it's hit or miss. So I think things like the contractor registry, for instance, is good. It's going to start. I think it's already up. You'll know who is good with the unions. You'll know their record. But it's difficult. Enforcement is difficult when this industry, for a long time, it's how do I make a buck on the backs of working people. So I do think that we should be rewarding good contractors that want to actually provide the wages, union wages, and all of that. But there's a lot of work to be done, and enforcement is tricky. Obviously, the state is huge, but it will take all of us. I know Senator Ramos here has a few bills up her sleeve. There's a state loan bill state loans are actually carved out of the prevailing wage language. So if you get a state loan for your bill, you actually don't have to pay prevailing wage. So, that would uncarve that loophole out. Again, we can add in language, we can pass a bunch of legislation. Trickiness is in the enforcement. So we have.
Enforcement is all municipal, or there's not state?
It's Department of Labor. Some of it's Department of Labor.
Yep, Department of
Yeah.
Labor. Yep.
And I'll speak to your first question about the OSHA recommendation in the report. So with climate change, we're seeing increasing hazards and risks to workers, both indoor workers and outdoor workers, right? We've got hazardous air quality days from wildfire smoke. We have incredibly intense storms, whether that's thunderstorms, that's winter storms, freezing temperatures, all of that. And then we've had high heat days. All of these things are pretty extreme, and New York State follows federal OSHA. So federal OSHA has oversight over private sector workers here. And without, federal OSHA does not have any specific standards around heat safety or air quality safety. So there's nothing that's very easy to enforce against, dangerous working conditions that are related to climate specifically. New York State has the option to create a state plan, and in so doing has to go at least as far as the federal government, but can go above and beyond federal OSHA. And so that's an opportunity for the state to actually set worker protections around heat safety, air quality, you name it. And there are several states that have done this. This is not a wild idea, but it is something that I think I'm passionate about. I think is really important. If you're in a union, you may be able to negotiate some protections in the private sector, but only about 11% of New York's private sector workers have that protection. So we're talking 88% of workers who don't. And so, what do you do when your employer tells you have to keep working and it's 95 degrees inside your building? It's very hard to have recourse, especially if you don't have a union protection. So that is where that comes from. Absolutely. Sure. Well, let's talk after. Okay. I see we have one question. We are kind of short on time. So is it a fairly brief question?
I'm never brief. I'm a teacher. I'm Vinny from UFC. So something that you were saying, sorry you're behind the pole. I feel like I'm at City Field right now. So about school construction authority, we have a class size law that everybody knew we had to build new schools about 5 years ago. And I'm a planner, so something for construction jobs and keeping them climate, friendly. This should have been implemented way before. We should already be planning on building these schools. And I think that's something we can all come together with, right? You were talking about unions before. Unions are the connection, right? What brought us into this room, what keeps us into this city. So I think going forward, we need to stick together more, even in those little minute details that don't seem important. Could be the difference of somebody going to school with 35 kids to 23 kids for 3 years, right? Like that's a huge difference. And not only that, climate jobs with CTE, this is your future workforce all the time. And since I teach Generation Alpha and Generation Z, they have such a dismal outlook on the future because of climate, right? Because of everything else that's going on. So I think bringing these things into schools, and again, I'm biased, I'm a teacher, right? this not only brings opportunity, but hope. And I think we could all use a little hope right now.
Yes.
Thank
Thank you. No, that's beautiful. Thank you. And that is a lovely segue. So thank you. So I just wanted to close our discussion with the final question for each of our panelists. So in this time of unprecedented attacks on vulnerable communities, of uncertainty, I mean, every day it's like, what's going to flood my zone now? I think there's, a real need for that hope that our last speaker just, mentioned. And so I would like to turn to each of you. Just give us a brief moment of what gives you hope when you're thinking about New York's future in this way. And Esther, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Oh, wonderful. Hope. I'm a very hopeful person. What gives me hope during this time? I think it's conversations like this. I'd have to say, selfishly, it's the trips that we take, to Denmark and Sweden and Vancouver with climate jobs and with labor leaders and with legislators, all sort of, for lack of a better term, nerding out together about what we could do and living in what is actually possible, degrounding us in the reality of what we have here. It helps us know that it's possible. And also, what gives me hope is that, for 12 years, IBEW was thinking about offshore wind. Did you all know that? I think that innately the labor movement has been sort of building in evolving workforces, evolving their understanding of what work is and how people should be working and how we can be working better for a long time. And that really does give me hope because they're always here doing the work before anyone is even noticing or even talking about it. So that really drives me and drives my work, and I'm excited to continue to do it.
Lori, would you like to share?
It did give me a second to think. And I would say being included, like the fact that Pulp is here, that we're being called on, there's a Senate hearing next week where I get to I talked about basic service charges tonight. That makes me happy. But, you all were here to listen to it. And the fact that each of you is an individual and you'll carry this message means so much. And so especially on days like today where our hotline is just off the hook, like all day. And I get that report. We know that we're not alone and that there's support out there, and it's our time. Like, we can do this. We just have to be smart. We have to be creative, and we have to be bold.
Thank you. And Chris?
My hope kind of skips a few steps and it goes to the outcome that ultimately, whatever it takes with everybody who's willing to step up and be involved, is that the world needs to change. And the only outcome is that it needs to change for the better. And with the relationships, with the work being done here, and all the various groups, that the world will change for the better because of everything that you all do and what we all do, whether you feel it or not, in the day in and day out grind. But that's the outcome, because the other outcome is not acceptable.
And Assembly Member, can you please share some thoughts?
Yeah, well, first, Pope gives me hope because, really they are doing such good work as a nonprofit. So if you have even $1, please donate to them because they really fight for the average New Yorker, and making sure that utility arrears is something that we're focusing on. The Climate Jobs Institute, making sure that we're centering workers when we talk about a just transition so that we all can have economic prosperity. And the bravery and courage of the average New Yorker. I've, in my career, have been through pandemics, extreme weather events, disasters, man-made disasters. And the everyday New Yorker is a hero, and they center each other around. And so don't believe that, people say, oh, New Yorkers are mean and all that. No, I've seen New Yorkers lay side to side in solidarity with each other. So that really gives me inspiration to continue to fight and to continue to push back against federal intervention, against, just the misinformation that exists in this work that we do around climate. So I just thank you all, and I thank the opportunity to be on this panel because it's really amazing to know that, there's another day. It might be bleak today, but we have a lot of hope for tomorrow, and the future is bright.
Thank you. That's great. I know we all here at CJI are really grateful that you all came out, and so many different perspectives are represented right now, different industries, people coming from the government, from climate, from environmental groups, from labor. It's really wonderful, and it gives us hope. So thank you everyone for coming. I encourage you to come and grab us. There's a reception after. There's a lot more food and drink available. We'll be here until 8:30. And just want to thank, again, our behind-the-scenes crew as well, Katie Hayden, Joanna Lugo, Catherine Solis-Fonte, the Marcoms team, and the Infrastructure Services team. And then encourage everyone to either pick up a copy of the report. We have stacks out there on the table, or if you want to be climate friendly, you can scan the QR code and have a digital copy. But these are union printed, so it's fine. Cycled paper, so it's okay. Thank you.